Hello everyone, welcome once again to my channel. I would like to start off by apologizing for a prolonged absence. There have been many things going on recently that have prevented me from putting content on this channel. We have moved within the last few months, and I haven't set up a decent spot to record these videos, for one thing. Another thing is that we haven't even lived in our new house for 6 months yet, and it has flooded 3 times. Thankfully, nothing has been ruined in these floods. It's just been a drain on our sanity and on our wallets. And for the couple viewers that may actually know me and my situation, last month we had to go out of state for my daughter. But having said all that, I would like to continue with this channel, and I hope to make more frequent uploads in the future. While I was away from the channel dealing with everyday life, a thought occurred to me, and I would like to discuss that with you guys today. With everything that's happening in the world lately, it's very easy to get discouraged. We can look around at all the different suffering that's going on, and depending on how we look at that suffering, our reaction can vary greatly. When we look to the Lord for answers, we can see that even though suffering is not a good thing, it has a very different role to play in our lives than those people who see the world from an ungodly or secular perspective. One of the first questions that we can ask ourselves is why? Why do we suffer? Why me? Why is there suffering in the world at all? The answer to this question is very easy to say and extremely hard to understand. The answer is that Christ gave us an example to live by when he came to earth. He came down from heaven. He left his home by the Father's side to come down to this earth. And he knew before he got here what he would have to suffer for us. He knew just exactly what needed to be done. In the book of John, chapter 13, he says, "I have given you an example to go and do just as I have done for you. A slave is not above his master, nor is a messenger greater than he who sent him." See, Jesus suffered for us even though he didn't deserve it. He willingly accepted our punishment. If the God of this world willingly suffered for our sake, how can we turn around and complain about the minor things that we have to suffer? There are 3 types or 3 ways in which we can suffer in this world. The first one is probably the one where we have the least amount of room in which to complain. And that is suffering because of something that we have done. Even though we really don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to this type of suffering, somehow people still manage to complain and feel cheated or feel that it's unfair that they have to go through it. But the other 2 types of suffering are really where we see many people begin to murmur and complain, and some even turn from God. Those 2 types are suffering because of the actions of somebody else, and just suffering by chance because of nothing that anyone did. Just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So let's look at the second option, because I'm sure that most of us can agree, if we suffer for something that we are at fault for, then it's it's not really something that needs to be complained about. If we mess up, we need to accept our consequences. So if we look at the second example, suffering because of the actions of other people, this is exactly what Christ has done for us. He suffered on a cross. He was beaten because of the actions of other people. This life is not about how much money we have at the end, or how many places we can go, how much fun we can have. We are called in this life to serve others, just as Jesus came to serve us. When we suffer for the sake of other people, this is pleasing in the sight of the Lord. 1 Peter tells us to rejoice as we share in the suffering of Christ. And Galatians chapter 6 tells us that we need to bear one another's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ. The third example of suffering, where it's not directly anyone's fault, just the luck of the draw, these situations can be a little bit harder to understand and a little bit harder to accept. Thankfully, the Bible is full of suffering for us to look towards for guidance. After Jesus, the most notable example of suffering in the Bible has got to be Job. Here is a man who lived his life in a way that pleased God. Satan thought that he could get Job to turn away from God if Satan took all of Job's possessions away from him. So, Satan destroyed his house, his farm, killed his livestock, killed his children and their wives. Still, Job did not turn away from God. So, Satan took it a step further and attacked Job's health. Job had to suffer through fevers, boils all over his body, nightmares, halitosis, unceasing pain, and many, many other things. Now, Job had no idea that Satan was the source of all of his suffering. As far as Job knew, there was no reason for all these things. But there was a purpose for what Job was meant to go through, just as there is a purpose for the suffering that we go through. Through his suffering, Job let the glory of God shine through him because of his continued faith. He also grew closer to God, proving that no matter what we go through, God will remain with us. Now, I've heard this argument that our suffering gives glory to God, and I've also heard a very, very common response to that argument that says, well, there are other ways that we can give glory to God, right? We still don't have to suffer to show him glory. We can still worship, we can still pray, we can still sing. There's many, many other ways that God receives glory. Why doesn't he help me through my suffering? He must know when I'm suffering. Why am I made to suffer? The disciples asked this very question of Jesus one day when they were out on the water. In the book of Mark, Jesus and the disciples are on a boat that gets caught in a huge storm. Now, these men aren't exactly the type of people who rented a boat once in their lifetime and went out for a joyride. They made their lives on the water. They were seasoned fishermen. This storm was so severe that it even scared them. As the men on the boat struggled to try and keep it from sinking, Jesus was asleep. The disciples ran to him and woke him up, and they cried, "Teacher, don't you care that we are about to die?" Certainly, suffering can feel that way, right? When we're in the middle of everything that's going on around us, and we feel like we're being hit from all sides, life can certainly seem like a threatening storm. And when Jesus woke up from being asleep on the boat, he rebuked his disciples, claiming that they still did not have enough faith. And with a few words, the waters became perfectly still. So one reason that we suffer could be to give God the glory. But that's not the only benefit that suffering has. It also has an immediate benefit for us in this life as well. The book of James tells us that we should be happy whenever we have to suffer. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you face various trials. You know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Let endurance have its effect, so you will be perfect and complete. When we go through trials, we become stronger and more resilient. That way, when we see others struggling, we can help them through it. And that takes us right back to Christ's example of helping others. Also, the next time that we're faced with suffering, we have already experienced some suffering, and we're going to be able to withstand it better than the first time we found it. In the same fashion, suffering can help us to be more grateful in our everyday lives. It may be cliche that you don't know what you have until it's gone, but things usually become cliche because they've proven to be true more often than not. One thing that comes up when we encounter suffering or are speaking with someone else who is suffering, sometimes they turn away from God, claiming that they've prayed for relief, but God has not answered them. And, as I've already mentioned, sometimes there's a reason for our suffering that we're not aware of. Perhaps we need to build up endurance. In 2 Corinthians, we can see that Paul had a thorn in the flesh that he was being forced to deal with. It's not explained exactly what he was going through, but the text tells us that he pleaded with the Lord 3 different times to remove his afflictions. God's answer was not what Paul wanted to hear. The Lord told him that, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." If Paul was made to continue in his suffering, can we not expect similar treatment? Now, certainly there are times when we suffer that God will cut our pain short. We should not expect this every time we begin to suffer. As we get older and life gets more complicated, so too do the problems that we have to deal with. My children lose their mind when they can't watch their favorite television show, or when one of their siblings knock over a tower that they've been building for the past 20 minutes. Now, to many people, these seem like very small things, but for my children, they are devastating events. If we've never had to deal with these type of small sufferings, how will we react when we get older and have to face true suffering and hardship? God not only knows exactly what we go through, He also knows what we're going to encounter later on down the road. This makes things so much easier to go to Him whenever we suffer, no matter what it is. He knows what it means to suffer, and He will always help us, whatever we may be going through. He may not always take our suffering away from us, but He will always help us go through it. So, next time when we face suffering or trials, hopefully we'll be better equipped to deal with them, and these passages will help you turn to God instead of from God. Thank you very much for listening to my ramble. assembled today. Thank you for being patient with this channel. May God bless you, and I will see you next time.